To take up all of this, we're joined by Congressman Greg Steube, a member of the Foreign Affairs and Judiciary Committees. Congressman Steube, great to have you with us. And let's start with Ukraine. Your thoughts as we are watching President Zelensky put on an amazing display of leadership, taking his country and matching it up with the second biggest military in the world, and at least staving off the Russians for the time being.
Yeah, I mean, he's really emerged as a world leader, which is interesting, given his background. He was like a comedian or an actor or something before he got elected, but he has certainly stepped up and done exactly what you expect a leader of a country who's being attacked by a dictatorship, evil regime to do. He's out there wearing a bulletproof flak vest with his soldiers. He's out there trying to encourage his people to be courageous. And he's doing exactly what I wished our leaders in the White House and in the administration were doing, and portraying a very strong position of power and strength to encourage the people in the Ukraine to continue to fight against Russian aggression, and beg the rest of the Western world and the United States and other countries to send him the weapons, the ammunition, the equipment, the javelins, which, oh, by the way, Trump did when Trump was president, send him javelins
right,
to be able to defend himself and his people. And it's just absolutely heartbreaking to see these video footage. I saw one this morning of a tank, a Russian tank, shooting what was clearly a civilian vehicle. It looked like a two-door sedan that we now find out there was an elderly Ukrainian couple there. I mean, the videos, the reports that we're getting of targeting civilians, shooting hospitals, shooting civilian targets is absolutely atrocious. It violates rules of war. It violates the Geneva Conventions. And this country, Putin and the Russian government should be held accountable for all of this.
Yeah, and I don't think that too many people expected much more of the Russian military. They have a reputation that suggested that they would just roll over Ukraine and take Kiev within a matter of days. It's now been weeks, and they are at the door of Kiev. But nonetheless, the Ukrainians have done a masterful job carrying the resistance, and the Ukrainian military carrying the fight to them wherever they could. You mentioned javelins, Congressman, and the fact that President Trump is the one who sent those to the Ukrainians. Those are remarkably effective weapons. And to see the video of that relatively small convoy of T-72 Russian tanks, I mean, they annihilated them with those weapons. That's really an extraordinary weapon in the arsenal, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think we should be doing more of that. We're not. I still don't. Well, I understand the logistical pieces of putting the Patriots in Poland because Ukrainians just don't have the training to deal with a weapon system like that. I get that, but let's get them what we can. Let's get them weapons. Let's get them ammo. Let's get them javelins. Let's get them things that'll be able to defend themselves. Because as like I was explaining in the video I saw this morning, a normal suburban civilian vehicle isn't going to stand against a Russian tank. So if there's things that we can do to protect the civilians and the citizens of Ukraine, I think we absolutely have an obligation. I think we actually have a moral obligation to help in any way that we can. And Congress passed some aid last night, and I'm glad that they separated the Ukrainian aid from the rest of the reckless spending that the Democrats wanted to do that would send some aid, $14 billion of new aid for the Ukraine.
Yes, and the passage of that legislation critically important to the Ukrainians. And where are we now with this $1.5 trillion spending bill? I mean, this is just one incredible record level of spending after another that is still being passed by this Congress, by the Senate, and signed by the president, will be signed by the president. I mean, where does it stop? There is inflation, and we're watching fiscal policy that is absolutely out of control.
Out of control. And let me just kind of go back a little bit to even emphasize that. When I first got elected to Congress, the deficit, I've only been in Congress for 2 cycles. I'm at the end of my 4th a year. The deficit was $21 trillion. We are now at $30 trillion in just a little over 3 years. So that's $9 trillion onto the deficit with no stop in spending whatsoever. In the last 2 years, this Congress, led by Democrats, have spent $11 trillion. That was before the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan that Biden passed when he first got elected president. That's not including the $1.2 trillion in quote unquote infrastructure package, which only 6% of that actually goes to roads and bridges and what most Americans consider infrastructure. And then now this, it's just spending after spending after spending. And any economist will tell you, if you dump a ton of cash on an economy and you're only taking in $3.5 trillion a year into the Federal Reserve, but spending 2 or 3 times that, you're going to cause inflation. And it's just, it's reckless abandon. And we have federal programs like Social Security and Medicare. You have programs within those federal programs that are going to be expending more money in the next year or so than they're actually taking in. Congress has got to stop the spending spree that is Washington, D.C., and the Democrats absolutely will not do it. The 4 years I've been in Congress, all they do is these omnibus or these CRs, continuing resolutions to fund the government. This is the first omnibus that they've done. And it just is building and building on a spending that we cannot sustain economically in this country.
And it almost appears as though this is a coordinated, orchestrated, finely thought out plan on the part of the Biden administration, the Democratic Party. They're trying to drive as much cash into this economy as they can. The idea that Jerome Powell, in his second term now as chairman of the Federal Reserve, reappointed by President Biden, will do what 3 interest rate hikes, I think is pure nonsense. At least if he might do 0.75% increases, but he sure is not going to do anything approaching a half or better in the way of interest rates. Your thoughts about what will happen and what will happen as a result of the Democrats being in such poor shape? It looks like it's going to be an absolute slaughter in November. Your thoughts?
Well, I certainly hope it is going to be a slaughter. You have had crisis after crisis after crisis that is you almost have to pick one of the most offensive crises to focus the American people on how bad this administration, the Democrats, are. I mean, we have 2 million illegal immigrants that have crossed the border, and they're getting TANF and food stamps and SNAP and all of these benefits that most Americans who are working aren't getting these benefits. You've got the atrocity that occurred in Afghanistan, where you and I sitting here speaking, we still have Americans that are trapped in Afghanistan. We abandoned $80 billion worth of military equipment, ammunition, weapons, Humvees, Apaches, Blackhawks. Wouldn't it be nice if the Biden administration would have just transferred that $80 billion worth of military equipment to the Ukrainians instead of handing it over to a terrorist regime who's either going to sell it to the highest bidder, probably China or Russia, or use it for terrorist activity, on top of inflation, on top of the record spending, on top of now Ukraine and their failures to do the things that they should have done long before they're now suddenly starting to react. It's almost like they're 2 weeks to a month behind doing what they should be doing and leading as a nation and leading as a country in this world, and just kind of sitting back and waiting to see what happens. And then when there's so much of a rigor one way or the other, like putting sanctions on Russian oil, finally, when 80%, the polls are like 80% of Americans support not importing Russian oil, suddenly then they decide to do something, and it's a month too late. They should have started these sanctions on the Russian government and on Putin and on all these other things that we could have done as soon as he started putting troops on the Ukrainian border, and it would have had a huge, devastating effect on his economy before he even invaded.
Yeah, and this administration is just it's almost preposterous to even think about taking them seriously. Here we are looking at an invasion, a war going on in Ukraine, and at the same time, we have to take them seriously. Biden and Harris, she's giggling her way through Poland. He is sleeping his way through his presidency. He spends more time in his Delaware basement than he does doing anything else as president. We are in deep trouble as a nation because we don't have I would call it a leadership vacuum, but it's far worse than a vacuum. It's an explosion of incompetence